Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum everyone. In this video we will discuss about literary forms, or you can say literary categories, or literary genres, or kinds of literature that we write. In simple words you can say literary forms are actually, in simple words, these are the kinds of literature. Now how many kinds of literature we have? We can have literature in the form of poetry, we can have literature in the form of drama, prose, short story, novel, fable. So there are many literary forms that we will discuss in this video. So literary forms or literary kinds, these are actually the devices they are used in literature, in different categories of literature. These are actually the categories of literature. So, what literary forms are, here its complete definition is given, but in simple words, you can say that it's actually any literary piece of work. Now, first of all, we have to define what is actually a literary piece of work. In simple words, you can say written description of ideas is called literature. They also define it that it is a reflection of life, because whenever we read any drama or any poetry, so in the poetry or drama or novel, the social and political aspects of the society of that particular time are mentioned. For instance, if we read Lamarck's poetry. So, as I was talking about, if we take example of Allama Iqbal's poetry, we can observe that the main focus of his poetry was to give awareness to the Muslim youth in subcontinent. So whenever, I mean, now we are in 2020, he wrote his poetries in 1920, 1930s, almost 100 years have been passed. So whenever we read his poetry, we get a reflection of that particular time in subcontinent, that what kind of difficulties and what kind of problems the Muslims they were facing in subcontinent, and he was trying to awake them with his poetry. So this is somewhat an example. If you read Shakespeare, you read John Milton, you read the father of English poetry, Geoffrey Chaucer, you read the ancient Greek writers, Aristotle, Plato, and others. We can easily find out, we can easily observe from the dramas, the poetries, and other literary pieces of work that there is a reflection of the society in literature. That is why literature is defined as a reflection of life. Reflection of life means what kind of life the people they were spending at that particular time. So, this was all about literature. Now, these literary forms, that the ideas actually, you can define these literary forms that if a writer has an idea to convey to his audience, he can either give his message through dialogues in drama form, through prose, or through poetry, fictional or non-fictional. So whatever the literary genre the writer wants to take, he can choose. So what the writer does in any piece of literature, that is actually the arrangement of the words, arrangement of sentences, arrangement of words, arrangement of ideas, cohesiveness of ideas. So, when we are talking about any complete piece of work, like a complete drama, like a complete poetry, any composition written by the writers, that is actually called literature or literary forms. And the word, this literary form I have mentioned here, it is taken from old French word which means beauty. So actually literature, it actually adds literary forms, they add beauty to the literature and beauty to ideas. Then we have again the development of the work, whatever the writer is writing. In a very simple terms, you can say that these literary forms they actually distinguish between the within the same literature. For you might have come across the name William Wordsworth, uh, a very well-known English poet. What he wrote, he is known as a poet of nature. Why is he known as poet of nature? Because he writes about the natural beauty. He writes about the philosophy of nature. So this was his ideology. Now it depends upon the writer when he has an idea to convey that either he can use dialogue form or he can use a poetical form. So whatever the form is used, that is called a literary form. In simple words, whatever the form or the method or the medium used by the writer to convey his message properly to the audience, that is called a literary form. Now we will define one by one these literary forms. The major literary forms are, there are two kinds of works in literature that we find out. One is fictional and one are non-fictional. In a broader aspect, you can say. Fictional means something that is based on imaginations, that is not based on facts. Sometimes we watch Hollywood movies, we call them like some aliens are coming, the aliens they are speaking English language and they try to attack the earth. Different kind of movies are there. The movies about vampires, there are many movies the Hollywood industry they have made about vampires. You know, these vampires, these aliens, life away from Earth, somewhere on another planet of universe. These are all imaginations. We do not have strong facts to prove it. So when the writer wants to convey us a message that the world is in a war with the aliens, so he creates fictional and imaginary aliens. Like if the aliens exist, no one knows what kind of shape do they have, what kind of appearance do they have, as we humans have, the animals have, but we do not know what kind of appearance these aliens have. But they are created according to the imagination of the writer. According to the imagination, if we are talking about the movie, the imagination of writer and the director. And when we are talking purely about the literature that is written, then we talk about the writer, the author. So this is called fictional work. Fictional means where you do not have any fact, any reasoning to prove it. It is just based on imaginations. Sometimes you might have come across the movies and the dramas that the main characters of the movie, they just simply they sleep at night and they go back somewhere 100 years back or 200 years back and they start living in that world, which is almost impossible. So there is no reasoning, there is no facts to prove it that like if we humans we sleep and we have some sort of imaginations and we go back to 500 years ago or 1000 years ago or 100 years ago, we cannot move back. We can have thoughts about the past, but we cannot physically go into the previous world that has already been passed, the previous time. We cannot go there. So same is the case here. This is called imagination, this is called fictional work. No, through fictional work sometimes the writers they want to convey their message through fictional work. So fictional work is also a part of literary form, that a writer thinks that the message thus, for example, if the writer wants to convey us a scientific message and he believes that this scientific message cannot be conveyed to the audience unless and until the writer engages some other species that is not existent on the on this earth, some from somewhere else, like I'm talking about the aliens. So he convey us a scientific message or any moral message through this fictional creation of the story, imaginations, just thoughts. And what is non-fictional? It is opposite to fictional. Like any story, any piece of idea that has strong reasoning, that has strong facts. For instance, when we talk about history, so in history we find out many fictional works. And when we talk about these scientific imaginations like aliens, vampires, and others, they are only imagination, they are fictional works. So fictional is imaginations and non-fiction is purely based on facts. Now, these are the two main types, fictional and non-fictional. The writers, they can either choose fictional work or they can choose non-fictional work. Now, you need to define what kind of literary forms they fall under the category of fictional work and what kind of literary forms they fall under the category of non-fictional work. It all depends upon the author, it all depends upon the writer, that what kind of genre he wants to take, what kind of category he wants to take to deliver his message. So sometimes they use fictional work because we can have many dramas, they are based on imaginary stories. We can have many novels, they are written on imaginary stories. We can have many poetical forms, they are written on imaginary stories. And we can have thousands of short stories, novels, dramas, and poetries. They are based purely on facts. So there is no proper distinction between fictional and non-fictional literary genres. Any type of genre can be, the writer can opt any type of or any kind of literary form. The purpose of the author or the writer is to convey the message. Now it's up to the writer that the writer takes the fictional work of an imaginary story to convey his message, or a story based on facts. And sometimes there is an amalgam, stories based on facts also, and some imaginary characters, they are introduced by the writers also. So this is the difference between fictional and non-fictional stories. In major literary forms, we have first of all poetry. The definition of poetry is quite simple, that the spontaneous overflow of ideas, as defined by Wordsworth. So poetry is actually an overflow of ideas, or the ideas that the writer wants to, the poet wants to convey to us. In As we have our poetry in Urdu, poetry of Mirza Ghalib, Faiz Ahmad Faiz, and others, Ahmad Fraz, and the great poets, Munir Ahmad Niazi, Parveen Shakir. They are great Urdu poets that we have in our Urdu literature. So as we know that poetry is all about, like in Urdu poetry, we find most of the poets, they talk about the lost love, they are talking about, their beloved and all that. And we have an idea in our minds that poetry is all about romantic love stories. Sometimes you are separated from your beloved, and all that we read in our poetry and in our songs also, because songs and movies, they are also literature. But the problem is that poetry is not actually what we believe, as we have a kind of thought that it's all about romantic stories about beloved and all that. But poetry is actually a kind of literature, an arrangement of words in rhyme, sometimes in rhyming words, that the last words of the lines, they are similar, and most of the times they are not similar. It is not essential for a poetry to have a rhyme scheme, that the last sentences, they must end with the similar sound. But sometimes they are free from such restrictions. The purpose here is to, the purpose of the author, the purpose of the poet is to convey an idea. But defining poetry, it is about emotions, response through meaning, sound, and rhythm. So but poetry actually, when we talk about literature, we talk about the underlying meanings that the writer wants us to convey. It's not about only rhyme scheme and only sounds and the last words, they should be similar. This is not actually what poetry is. Poetry is just like a drama. Poetry is just like a movie. Because the writer wants to give us a philosophy, writer wants to convey us a moral lesson, or any other kind of lesson, or any other kind of message that he wants to convey to us. So you have to define poetry in philosophical terms, the arrangement of words in rhythm that has some idea. Unless and until an idea is conveyed by the writer, the purpose of poetry is not actually fulfilled. Then fiction I have already defined. Let's talk about drama. The difference between drama and poetry is that in poetry we have the sentences or the poetical couplets, they are written in a rhyme scheme. The last words or the sentences, they are similar. But in drama it can be in dialogues, it can be in poetical form. For example, that blank verse, a type of writing like the last words, they are similar. When you read the dramas of Christopher Marlowe, when you read the dramas of Shakespeare, you can find many of his characters speaking in poetical forms. So the dialogues, they were written in poetical forms. We move back to ancient Greek, they also used to write it in poetical form. As we read poetry, so the dialogues, they were written in this category. But the difference is that in drama, the writer conveys us a message through characters, and the characters, they perform on stage. But in poetry there is no such condition that it must be performed on stage. In poetry, the poet conveys us a message to the reader through his philosophical lines. But in drama, the author conveys a message to the audience through his characters, by the dialogues which he has written, and they speak on the while performing the drama on the stage. So in drama, language, idea and theater is important. In poetry it's all about philosophy, and it's all about a rhyme scheme, and it's all the major theme of the poetry must be a strong philosophical message. As we have message in Allama Iqbal's poetry, great messages he has given to us. There is nothing like, you read Iqbal's poetry, he doesn't talk about the lost beloved, he doesn't talk about any romantic love stories. He simply conveys us a message to awake the people. So this is actually the purpose of the poetry. You read the English poetry, you will hardly find any poet talking about beloved and girlfriends and boyfriends and others, and the relationship between man and woman. It has been very slightly touched by the poets, English poets. And in our, we have Iqbal, Allama Iqbal, great Allama Iqbal, and after that the revolutionary poet Habib Jalib. He also wrote a very thought-provoking poetry, and he was also free from this beloved and all that we have in our, the young poets. They are also writing the same about the lost love, about the describing the beauty of the beloved and all that. So this poetry, actually the poetry is not about that. If you want to compare English poets with Urdu poetry, you can have the example of Habib Jalab and Iqbal's message of poetry. They are similar to the messages, not to the messages, but the purpose of writing the poetry by these two writers, same as written by Wordsworth, John Keats and others. They talk about the philosophy of life, they talk about the philosophy of nature, they talk about other issues of life apart from these romantic love stories. So in dramas, the author talks to the audience through his characters when they speak dialogue. The dialogues can be in poetical forms, the dialogues can be in normal prose forms that we speak in normal life. So just 300 years ago, 400 years ago, all the dramas performed on the stage, they were in poetical form. Then we have prose, non-fiction. Prose means when we write an essay, like it is all based on facts. Prose is not something that we create by imaginations. It is based on facts. If an idea is given by an author, the idea must be supported by some facts. Unless and until it is supported by the facts, it will fall under the category of fictional literature, and that will not be prose actually. An example of a written prose, it differs from most traditional poetry where the form. So in prose, one thing must be different from poetry and drama, that it is always in the form of dialogues, in the form of sentences, not in the form of poetic couplets. Like two lines and their ending words, they are similar, the rhyming words, they are similar. So we have to differentiate between prose, drama and poetry. Poetry is all the ideas described by the rhyming words, sometimes by rhyming words, sometimes by other, and poetry is all free from grammatical categories. There is no compulsion. The poet is always free from grammatical categories. He can violate all the rules of grammar, in whichever the language they are writing the poetry, either in English, in Urdu, in Punjabi, or any other language. So in prose is always in form of sentences and form of essays. So that's why it falls under the category of non-fictional works. And in short story means a kind of story that you can read it in an hour or two. But the basic definition of short story will be that an event that ends within a day. That's something the writer starts writing about an event or a story. That story started actually from morning and it ended in the evening. That will be a short story. But if we talk about a long narrative story, that something the story started in 2005, then what happened in 2010, then 2012 to 2013, and it ends in 2020, that will be a novel. A long narrative story, that is novel. And short story, whatever the event the writer is taking to write a short story, the event must finish from dawn to dusk, from morning to evening, or from morning to night, or within 24 hours. The event must finish within 24. Reader can read it in 30 minutes or in 15 minutes also, but the writer must describe an event that doesn't take a longer period of time. So, if a writer is writing story from 2005 to 2009, it will be a novel. If a writer started writing story from 17 December 2020 and the event ends in 18 December 2020, it will be a short story.